George Washington 1788 to 891,792 George Washington February 22, 1732 to December 14, 1799 was the first President of the United States from 1789 to 1797. Before he became President, he was the Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army during the American Revolutionary War and one of the Founding Fathers of the United States. Early life George Washington was born on February 22, 1732, at his family's plantation on Pope's Creek in Westmoreland County, in the British colony of Virginia, to Augustine Washington, 1694 to 1743, and his second wife, Mary Ball Washington, 1708 to 89. George, the eldest of Augustine and Mary Washington's 6 children, spent much of his childhood at Ferry Farm, a plantation near Fredericksburg, Virginia. As a teenager, Washington, who had shown a talent for mathematics, became a successful surveyor. His surveying expeditions into the Virginia wilderness earned him enough money to begin buying land of his own. In 1751, Washington made his only trip outside of America, when he traveled to Barbados with his older half-brother Lawrence Washington, 1718 to 52, who was suffering from tuberculosis and hoped the warm climate would help him get better. Shortly after their arrival, George contracted smallpox. He survived, but the illness left him with permanent facial scars. In 1752, Lawrence, who had been educated in England and served as Washington's mentor, died. Before the Revolutionary War in December 1752, at age 20, Washington, who had no previous military experience, was made commander of part of the Virginia militia. He went to Pittsburgh with a regiment to make the French go away. The French decided to fight and the mission failed. Many of his men were killed. The fight opened the French and Indian War, bringing Britain into the 7 Years' War. In 1758, he was elected to the Virginia legislature. Personal life on January 6, 1759, aged 26, he married Martha Dandridge Custis, Martha Washington, 1731 to 1802, a rich 27-year-old widow with 2 children. The Revolution Washington proved to be a better general than a military strategist. His strength lay not in his tactics on the battlefield, but in his ability to keep the struggling colonial army together. His troops were poorly trained and did not have food, ammunition, and other supplies. Soldiers sometimes even went without shoes in the winter. However, Washington was able to give them direction and motivation. His leadership during the winter of 1777 to 1778 at Valley Forge was a testament to his power to inspire his men to keep going. By the late 1760s, Washington had experienced firsthand the effects of rising taxes imposed on American colonists by the British and came to believe that it was in the best interests of the colonists to declare independence from England. Washington was a delegate to the First Continental Congress, which was created by the 13 colonies to respond to various laws passed by the British government. The Second Continental Congress chose him to be the commanding general of the Continental Army. Washington led the army from 1775 until the end of the war in 1783. After losing the Big Battle of Long Island and being chased across New Jersey, Washington led his troops back across the Delaware River on Christmas Day, 1776. In a surprise attack on Hessian mercenaries at the small Battle of Princeton and Trenton, New Jersey. The British had more troops and supplies than Washington. However, Washington kept his troops together and won these small battles. Overall, Washington did not win many battles, but he never let the British destroy his army. With the help of the French Army and Navy, Washington made a British Army surrender at Yorktown, Virginia, in 1781, as the final major battle of the Revolutionary War. The war officially ended with the Treaty of Paris in 1783. After the war, when the war ended, Washington was considered a national hero. He was offered a government position that would have been considered a dictatorship over the colonies. But in a surprising move, Washington refused, left the army, and returned to Mount Vernon. He wanted the colonies to have a strong government but did not wish to head that government. Nor did he want the colonies to be run by a tyrant. Washington was one of the men who said the country needed a new constitution. The Constitutional Convention met in 1787, with Washington presiding. The delegates wrote the Constitution of the United States, and all the states signed it and joined the new government. Presidency on January 7, 1789, aged 56. Washington was elected president without any competition, making him the first president of the United States. John Adams, 1735 to 1826, who received the second largest number of votes, became the nation's first vice president. Washington was inaugurated on April 30, 1789, in New York City at the age of 57. Because Washington, D.C., America's future capital city, was not built yet, he lived in New York and Philadelphia. Presidency on January 7, 1789, aged 56, Washington was elected president without any competition, making him the first president of the United States. John Adams, 1735 to 1826, who received the second largest number of votes, became the nation's first vice president. Washington was inaugurated on April 30, 1789, in New York City at the age of 57. Because Washington, D.C., America's future capital city, was not built yet, he lived in New York and Philadelphia. While Washington did not belong to any political party, he agreed with some Federalist Party policies, such as that the country should have a standing army and a national bank. While in office, he signed a bill establishing a future, permanent U.S. capital along the Potomac River. The city was later named Washington City, in his honor. He was re-elected to a second term. After his second term, Washington decided not to run for re-election. Despite his popularity remaining high, his choice to stop at 2 terms set a pattern that every president followed until Franklin D. Roosevelt in 1940. In Washington's farewell address in 1796, he warned the country not to divide into political parties and not to get involved in wars outside of the United States. Washington's non-intervention foreign policy was supported by most Americans for over 100 years. His advice to avoid political parties was completely ignored, as parties were already active. Retirement: Washington went back home to Mount Vernon, Virginia, after his second term ended in 1797. Death in December 1799. Washington caught a cold after looking at his properties in the rain. 3. The cold turned into a throat infection called epiglottitis, and Washington died on the night of December 14, 1799. At the age of 67, he was buried at Mount Vernon, which in 1960 was designated a National and Historic Landmark. Some think that the main cause of his death was bloodletting. 3. This treatment was common at the time. For hundreds of years, it was believed that the best way to make a person's life longer or heal them was to balance the humor's wealth from his marriage. George Washington owned a large amount of farmland, where he grew tobacco, wheat, and vegetables. Washington also owned more than 100 slaves, who were freed on his day of death. He did not have much money in cash and had to borrow money while he was president. At his death, Washington's estate was worth over $500,000.